I'll start by saying there is no one in Israel that doesn't have an October 7th story. It's very important for me to relay to you because the bearing of witness that now you each become will help us fight the war that I will try to describe to you. But before that, I would like to share our October 7th story. I have an observant family, 4 children, 3 of them are in the army, and it was Shabbat Simchat Torah. So as you know, we went to synagogue on Friday night, Simchat Torah. And Simchat Torah, the celebration of the Torah, I try to make accessible the celebration of the Old Testament that we share, that was desecrated the next morning. That celebration began on Friday night with pure joy, the memory that for thousands of years the Jewish people had a book to celebrate the joy of the Torah. And so in our community, the older kids, my children are part of the older kids, actually make it their point to make sure that the younger kids know we are celebrating a book, which seems a little bit in 2025 or then in 2023, something that's hard to understand for children. And so my best friend's son, Aryeh Ziering, who was also my son's role model and best friends of our children, came into synagogue with a tallis over his head, covering his head, and screamed out in a very powerful voice for all the little kids to get excited, "Worship the Lord with joy. Ivdu et Hashem besimcha." And Aryeh Ziering made those kids dance that night. They didn't know who was under there, and he was really huge. And those are the last words we heard Aryeh Ziering say. Because on October the 7th in the morning at 6:29, we were all awakened to red alert sirens and all took refuge in our safe rooms. But like good Israelis, and Avishai said, down south, their red alert sirens continued, but ours didn't. So like tough Israelis, we said, well, we'll go to synagogue. Plus you should know, especially in Orthodox synagogues, you go to synagogue to find out what's happening. Somebody has always read the news, always. So we said, we'll go to, instead of turning on our phones, we'll go to synagogue. We'll find out what's happening. And indeed, actually, over the course of the morning, wives came to say goodbye to their husbands. Children came to say goodbye to their kids. I asked my best friend where her sons were that had been in synagogue the night before. And she said, her youngest daughter said, Aryeh said he was going down south. And 5 hours into the battle that we witnessed, part of the horrors of Aryeh Ziering was killed. And so October the 7th, has touched every home. In a day of tragedy that I don't think we've even begun to process. In our case, we have buried more of our friends' kids and our kids' friends in these 19 months than one can even imagine. And I was sharing with somebody before, the kids congregate at military cemeteries. They come home from the army on Friday. Instead of going out for hummus, like the delicious one we had here tonight, they bring a beer and sit around their best friends' graves. That's where they congregate. And that is the moment we're meeting at tonight. And that is my gratitude to you. My gratitude to you, each and every one of you, is that you are bearing witness. And you know, last night I couldn't get over Margot Friedlander, who passed away. The last time I was in Berlin to speak at a conference for the justice minister, we met at the Lieberman Villa, where the Wannsee conference took place. And I'm a lawyer by profession. And I forgot that 9 of the 15 men who decided on the final solution that night, they were lawyers. That more than half of the 15 men who convened held doctorates in various subjects. And the hope that I received on that night was from Margot, when she shared with me while playing with her mother's necklace, which is all she had left because her entire family was murdered in the Shoah. She shared with me that her mother said to her, make a life, make a life. And that is what she lived by, the understanding that bearing witness and coming back to Berlin after her husband passed away in order to be able to share the story brings me to what I want to share with you. Because in many ways, when I went to the UN, actually 1 month after October the 7th, and held a hearing that I called Never Again is Now, is the moment that we are meeting at. What I call the 8th front of war that is raging on and since October the 7th is the one that I want to speak to you about. The one that has mainstreamed anti-Semitism again, that has unleashed a genie from a bottle that will take each and every one of us to fight on the 8th front if we're going to be able to put the genie back in the bottle. To understand that October the 7th was what I called in my hearing in the UN a Kristallnacht moment. But the question was what we would do after Kristallnacht. And so in the 19 months that have passed, the world receives a fail in what we have done after the moment in history, fueled by raging anti-Semitism, and we witnessed just a fraction of what it is that happened on that day, that bludgeoned and murdered and burned alive and raped and abducted and continues to hold 59 human beings, in my language, in standing violation of law and morality. But what's much more devastating than October the 7th, because Hamas is a genocidal terror organization. In its charter, it states its commitment to annihilate the state of Israel and murder Jews. Like Mein Kampf found in the tunnels that Hamas dug, we understand that they are fueled by that very lethal, ever-mutating virus that is anti-Semitism. What's much more devastating is the responses to the atrocities, to the war crimes, to the crimes against humanity perpetrated on October the 7th. Again, responses of silence. Me too, unless you're a Jew. Responses of denial that began, and we have to know this, where it took systematic Holocaust denial a little time to develop. October 7 denial began on October 7. Even while those barbaric savages gleefully live-streamed the atrocities they perpetrated, calling their parents with pride, denial began. Responses of justification. Judith Butler, that I studied in law school as a radical feminist, explaining to the world that rape is armed resistance. And responses of attacks of Jews and Zionists, because you need not be a Jew to be the target of this strain of an ever-mutating hate of anti-Zionism. You need just believe in the right of the state of Israel to exist, to be the target of this lethal strain. Anti-Zionism that denies Israel's very right to exist. And let's be clear, October the 7th wasn't about borders. It wasn't about 1967. As was shared with us, the people attacked on that day were amongst the most peace-loving people in the state of Israel, kibbutzim and moshavim, that drove Gazan children to hospitals in Israel. October the 7th was about 1948. Does the state of Israel have a right to exist in any borders? To which the answer of Hamas, a genocidal terror proxy, of the Houthis, of Hezbollah, and of the Islamic Republic in Iran, to be differentiated from the people of Iran, is no. And if you don't believe me, you can just look at the Supreme Leader's X account and every single day understand that the call to annihilate the Jew among nations is the one that led the October 7th massacre, and devastatingly, that led the responses to the October 7th massacre. And so if I just have to share my analysis of how we reach this moment so that we can think together what we do to fight as boots on the ground on this 8th front, of which I am grateful for your partnership in a way that I can't express in words. knowing that 2025 is not 1945, and that I have a room full like this in every country that I've landed since October the 7th. The understanding that I would like to be able to make accessible is how is it that anti-Semitism that has existed for thousands of years mutates? And I will posit that survival of anti-Semitism, a virus that mutates by latching onto the guiding social construct of each time, religion, science, and the secular religion of our times, possibly the only reason that I'm standing before you, human rights. The understanding that it is human rights that have been hijacked and weaponized, and I'm going to say, and their institutions and their mechanisms and their principles, hijacked and appropriated for the mechanism of anti-Semitism, the demonization, the delegitimization, and the double standards, what Natan Sharansky in the IRA, in the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition, calls the 3 Ds. Because the mechanism, demonization, delegitimization, and double standard, is what we need to understand if we are going to be able to make the words never again mean anything. In order for never again to mean anything, it's not enough that we remember what happened in the past. We must remember what happened in the past, as Margot Friedlander dedicated her life to ensure people do. We must remember what happened on October the 7th and gather all the details that we can, as Zakadu. But that is not enough. That is just a first step. We must understand how it is that anti-Semitism can again, in a tsunami, be legitimized and mainstreamed in response to the worst attack of Jews since the Holocaust. And the understanding that anti-Semitism mutated by latching onto the guiding social construct of our time, human rights, and that this war began 50 years ago, when after a series of conventional wars from 1948, in which Jews, a prototypical indigenous people that read the same book, the Bible, in the same language, Hebrew, in the same land, Israel, practicing the same customs and rituals for thousands of years, it's what indigeneity means, returned to an ancestral homeland after thousands of years of exile and persecution, of which the Holocaust was just the most recent, committed to equality. By the way, that's just Israel's Declaration of Independence. The understanding that from 1948 until 1973, a series of conventional wars failed to destroy the Jew among nations, the single Jewish nation state. And so what I call an unconventional war for public opinion, for hearts and minds, was waged in none other than the United Nations with a 1975 Zionism is Racism resolution, passed in the UN, Soviet propaganda. It pre-existed 1975. Soviet propaganda alive and well on the streets of Berlin, Toronto, Amsterdam, on university campuses, online. Zionism is racism. So when I come to law schools across North America and I come to speak about anti-Semitism, what it says on the sidewalk in big pink chalk letters is Zionists not welcome. That's before October the 7th. After October the 7th, it already says Jews not welcome. Zionism is racism, blood libel number 1 that enabled the mutation of this strain of anti-Semitism that is anti-Zionism, the denial of Israel's right to exist. Blood libel number 2, the 2001 Durban Conference Against Racism, UN conference, turned into an anti-Semitic hate fest. It's a conference against racism. The last day is an anti-Semitic hate festival, after which blood libel number 2 is born. Israel is an apartheid state. Now, I'm old enough to remember precisely what apartheid was. And Israel, like all our democracies, is imperfect. There's a lot of things we need to repair, but Israel is not an apartheid state. And so blood libel number 2 becomes acceptable, including on every single university campus across North America, holding every single year an Israel Apartheid Week. 24 years of Israel apartheid weeks. Blood libel number 1, 50 years, Zionism is racism. Blood libel number 2, Israel's an apartheid state, 24 years. That means we have 24 years of university graduates that now believe Israel's an apartheid state, and in the most Orwellian inversion of fact and law, in response to the atrocities you bore witness to, the appropriation, the hijacking, the weaponization of genocide, of the Holocaust itself. Genocide, a term coined by Raphael Lemkin to describe the atrocities of the Holocaust because there was no term, alongside crimes against humanity coined by Lauterpacht. Genocide, a term that has a definition and that created what we know of as the Convention for the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide in international law infrastructure. That genocide, the term, and that convention, used by none other than South Africa, then none other in the International Court of Justice, to seat the State of Israel on the dock of the accused, Dreyfus, seated on the dock of the accused in the aftermath of October the 7th, 2023, even as the State of Israel is defending itself from openly declared genocidal intent in a multi-front war that was not only waged on October the 7th, but has been raging since, with thousands of rockets and firing of missiles continuing until just Friday in our own homes. The understanding that genocide itself and that the Holocaust has been appropriated and weaponized to demonize and delegitimize and apply double standards to the Jew among nations is why here in Germany, it's the most important for me to come. I believe truly that only Israel and Germany together can not only remember the past, which we must do, but can understand that anti-Semitism did not begin in 1933 and did not die in Auschwitz. Anti-Semitism is as old as the Jewish people ourselves, and Jewish history did not begin in 1933 and did not die in Auschwitz or with the return of Jews to our ancestral homeland as some sort of blood libel of Israel's European colonialist project, a reparation prize, if you will, for the murder of 6 million Jews. That's not what the State of Israel is. I said, the State of Israel is the nation state of the Jewish people, a prototypical indigenous people returned after thousands of years of exile and persecution, committed to equality. That's Israel's declaration of independence. And the reclamation of the Holocaust, that too has been appropriated in order to be able to not only remember the past, but to reclaim the present from what endangers all of our societies. Because in the words of the late Rabbi Sachs, anti-Semitism is the most reliable sign of a major threat to humanity and freedom and the dignity of difference. And to that I will say, again, remembering the past, reclaiming what it is that's being appropriated, including our stories and our facts and our legal infrastructure, and renewing the covenant that when I speak to an audience like this, and as we continue our countdown, I believe it's the 30th day of the Omer, between Pesach and Shavuot, when we receive the covenant, that we share the understanding that renewing the covenant, not just to the 10 Commandments in the way that we share fundamentally, but renewing the covenant amongst us and in the spaces that we inhabit in democracies in order to be able to, from my perspective, address the rising threat that October the 7th, like September 11th, made very clear in an attack of barbarism on our shared civilization. And so once again, just to say how grateful I am and how much hope it gives me to be in rooms like this. And in order to be able to make the beautiful hatikvah that we heard tonight, the hope, become something that we realize together, I once again quote the late Rabbi Sachs, who differentiated between optimism and hope, because people always say to me, you're very optimistic. And I say, oh, no. What I have is hope, is tikvah, that has carried my people for thousands of years and will carry us for thousands more. But hope, he says, as opposed to optimism, is not a passive virtue. It's an active virtue. And whereas optimism is the belief that everything will be okay, for those that know Hebrew, yeh beseder, it's a big one in Israel. Hope is the belief that together we can make it okay. And it takes not very much courage to be an optimist, but a great deal of courage to have hope. And so thank you for being a room that rekindles hope, that is not only committed to action and to moral clarity, but to doing so with courage. Thank you.